Jesus Ponce Cáceres is an ice cream vendor in Tegucigalpa, the capital of Honduras. He's the main character in a documentary that a local video team is producing. Francisco is the cameraman, and Gina's taking sound. The team is working on a series of videos. They'll be used to counter the misconceptions and prejudice about life in Tegucigalpa's shantytowns.
Para mí, yo creo que lo lógico.
The team has already made one documentary about Jesus. This is their second attempt. Before undertaking the new production, they screen the first story in order to understand their mistakes and to see how they might improve it.
Bueno, veamos esta cuestión antes. Vamos a ver lo que tenemos de lo que filmamos en Santa Lucía.
Every day before leaving for work, Jesus Ponce Cáceres kisses his wife and children goodbye. It is early in the morning, as Jesus always leaves home at 6:30. He is an ice cream vendor in Tegucigalpa. At 7:30, Jesus arrives at a distribution center of the company Oso Polar, the largest ice cream producer in Tegucigalpa. He greets his fellow workers and picks up his cart. Jesus brings his cart to where the vendors must await the arrival of the truck. While waiting for the truck, the vendors busy themselves cleaning their carts and taking out the refrigeration units that must be changed every day. When the truck arrives, the vendors all converge on it. A middleman receives the money that the vendors must pay for the use of the carts. After replacing the refrigeration units, it's time to pick up their merchandise and stock the carts. When everything is ready, the paleteros, as they are known, disperse throughout the city of Tegucigalpa to sell their ice cream. As for Jesus, he must walk a long way on foot in order to find good selling spots. Here, he is crossing a bridge on his way to the Comayagüela market. There, he spends the whole morning selling. In the afternoon, Jesus leaves the city for a small village called Santa Lucia. There is a celebration in Santa Lucia today, which would normally be a good opportunity to sell ice cream. But this time, not many people have come to the festivities, and Jesus explains that he has not sold very much.
There are very few people here. You can see there isn't much going on. When there are enough people, you sell more. When there are many people, you sell a lot. Everybody does well. Also, many people like to drink instead of eating ice cream. And you cannot charge too much, or people don't buy anything.
After his day in Santa Lucia, Jesus still has a long way to walk before reaching home. When Jesus arrives home in the evening, he has supper with his wife and children. It is his work that allows him to buy food for his family.
Lo que vamos a entrever ahora es cuándo vamos a entrelazar esto.
After some discussion, the team members recognize the mistakes they made in this first production. You can also take a few moments to discuss the following points. Is the story interesting and effective? What do you think of the camera work? The sound? What about the narration? The sound and the image editing?
Por la vida. O sea, la fuerza que pone, el esfuerzo que hace el paletero diariamente.
Once the evaluation is over, the team discusses changes to be made to the production.
A mí me parece que falta que le tomen en cuenta a la esposa de Jesús.
I think we should also film the wife of Jesus because in many ways her work complements his.
You're always defending women.
Of course, I'm a woman. In the story we don't say much about his wife and his children, but she plays such an important role in the family.
I agree, but don't forget that we're shooting a story about an ice cream vendor, not about his wife.
The team members finally agree upon several ways of improving their documentary and give themselves the following objectives: to strengthen their research and make the narration more interesting, to choose more revealing shooting situations, to improve the camera and sound work, and finally, to find a more dynamic editing structure. This time the shoot has been well prepared. The script has been rewritten, the shooting schedule has been established, and locations have been carefully scouted. Napoleon is both journalist and director on this project, but he's fully aware that the success of the shoot depends on teamwork. Here they're preparing to interview Jesus. Let's take a minute to screen the interview from the first report. This interview was shot at the heart of the action, and that's an advantage, but it was badly directed. The framing's not very good, people are watching the video crew, camera movements are abrupt, and there's a lot of ambient noise.
No se mira mucha población, ¿verdad? De gente. Y cuando hay bastante gente hay más venta. ¿Verdad? El montón de gente ahí se vende bastante, vende el uno, vende el otro. Y andamos bastante venta ahorita, ¿verdad? Y la gente poca, mucha gente mejor para comerse un helado de venga un fresco.
Here are the sources of noise that prevent us from hearing what Jesus is saying.
Tampoco hay uno más barato fresco, unos 50 centavos que dan 70, 80.
La colaboración de la cervecería hondureña.
Throughout this video, you'll see placards like this one. They refer to chapters in the handbook that will give you more detailed explanations. The team has learned that sound, as much as image, is a crucial element in the shoot. For this new interview, they'll use 2 different microphones in order to determine which gives the best results. First, Gina places a lapel microphone on Jesus that brings his voice into the foreground. Meanwhile, Manuel, the assistant cameraman, begins to work on a lighting problem. Jesus is backlit, so his face is in shadow. By adjusting his reflector, Manuel is able to light Jesus' face sufficiently for the camera to be able to pick up details. A piece of white or aluminum-covered cardboard would serve the same purpose.
La relación con mi trabajo, la relación con mi trabajo es con mis compañeros, todo.
Once the lighting problem has been solved, Gina places a second directional microphone mounted on a boom. She holds the microphone just outside the picture frame and watches the cameraman's movements in order to adjust herself to any changes he's making. She must also move the microphone to record the journalist's questions. Here's the sound recorded by the directional microphone.
Sería mía y me diera pues mi pasar siempre porque ya yo compraría el producto más cómodo porque ya me iría directamente a la fábrica.
This is the sound recorded by the lapel mic.
Para obtenerlo ya tendría que estar ahorrando, ¿verdad? Pero tendría que dejar tal vez de su...
In every situation, the sound person has to carefully choose the most suitable microphone.
Sea mía propia, ¿verdad?
No lo hemos podido arreglar, ¿verdad?
As Gina had suggested, the team interviews Ana, Jesus' wife.
No hemos podido, pues, porque el sueldo no es muy poco, no nos da, pues, solo para la comida.
Throughout the production, it's important to remember that the scenes you shoot will be cut at the editing stage, so be sure to take a variety of angles and framings of the same scene. If you cut from one part of the interview to another with the same framing, there's a jump in the image. This isn't necessarily bad, but usually it's best to avoid it. You should therefore take certain precautions.
Pero a veces están lo mismo que aquí en las pulperías en la colonia.
For example, the camera person can alter the framing while the journalist is asking questions. Or reaction shots of the interviewer can be used as cutaways. These will also allow you to alternate different framings.
Solo para lavar, para hacer así cuestiones en la casa. Pero el agua de tomar siempre se compra en otros lados. No sacar un trabajo.
But beware of using close-ups that may give greater importance to the interviewer than to the main subject. It's also important that you respect what's known as the axis and the direction of looks. Here, Ana is looking towards screen left. The journalist should therefore look towards the right. If you don't, here's what happens. Ana jumps from the right to the left of the screen.
Como eso no es posible porque es el dinero que nosotros pues no nos da nada para ponernos nosotros a estudiar esas carreras.
¿Alguna idea que tenga usted del futuro de sus hijos? ¿Qué es lo que ha pensado hacer usted en el futuro?
In addition to reaction shots, you can also film the journalist repeating questions. Some people consider this to be an artificial solution, but it can be useful in certain situations. Before discussing camera movements, let's look at movement produced optically with a zoom, a lens with variable focal length. Fascinating, but beginners often overdo it, causing the viewer to feel seasick in the process. Also, as in this sequence, the zoom in generally ends up out of focus. This handheld zoom isn't as stable as it could be. This one is well executed. The movement is stable, the speed good, and the shot remains in focus until the end. However, the cameraman is too far from his subject. The final framing of the shot is too wide to be interesting. When a zoom is executed in one direction, it may be useful to do one in reverse. This will give you additional editing choices. The same principles of stability and speed apply to true camera movements, such as the pan. This one is rather unstable. Here's a well-executed horizontal pan. The speed is fast enough to keep the audience interested, but not so fast that they can't get a good view of the city. An excessively quick pan, particularly with a long lens, is extremely unpleasant for the spectator. The longer the focal length, the slower the movement should be. Of course, the same principles apply to vertical pans.
Paletas. Hay paletas. Rellenas iconos, paletas. Paletas.
There should always be a good reason for panning, and the camera movement should constantly reveal pertinent information. Be sure to avoid movements that don't add anything to the story. An interesting way of using pans is to follow a movement. This may lead us to discover other situations, other characters. Normally, the camera movement is stopped to allow the subject to leave the frame. Another frequently used camera movement is the traveling shot, a forward, lateral, or circular displacement of the camera. This can be very dynamic. A traveling shot can be handheld, but it's preferable to have a vehicle, like the small truck used here by the team. A car window or roof can serve the same purpose, or why not, a wheelchair. For the traveling shot to be relatively stable, it should be carried out on a smooth surface, for example, a paved road. If a traveling shot is taken from a car, make sure that the tires are not overinflated, as this causes the image to vibrate. The camera person can also execute other movements, like this handheld crane shot. There's never enough emphasis placed on sound quality. The sound person should stay constantly aware of audio perspective and ambient sounds, and try to avoid recording extraneous noises. It's important to record wild sound, in this case, roosters. These are the elements that will enrich the overall soundtrack.
Bueno, aquí está la paleta. Gracias. Vaya, hay paletas y paletas, hay paletas y paletas y paletas. Hay paletas.
As for audio perspective, there are no absolute rules. Nothing obliges you to record sound from exactly the same location as the image. Here we see Jesus from a distance. The sound recorded near the camera is in the correct sound perspective. But the sound that interests us, the small bell on Jesus' ice cream wagon, can't be heard against the din of the city. If you have a wireless microphone, you can place it on Jesus, an effective but costly solution. Also, the sound picked up by the wireless may be too live for the camera's distance from the subject. The sound person can also approach the subject after the image has been recorded to take wild sound that can then be used in editing. Here's how we can mix the ambient sound taken from a distance with the wild sound recorded near the subject. Let's return to the image track. When shooting a scene, the camera person should always take the following 3 types of shots: general or establishing shots, action sequences, and cutaways. In this sequence, the arrival of the Oso Polar truck, the camera person is too passive, too distant from the action. Let's look at another take of the truck's arrival. Here, the camera person is more active. He quickly takes a shot of vendors waiting, then follows with the arrival of the truck. In getting closer to the characters, he participates in the action. The camera person seeks out interesting people and significant events. He looks for revealing details and close-ups that will be helpful at the editing stage. Action sequences should normally respect the continuity of movements, gestures, looks, lighting, and so on. However, in documentary, continuity can be more flexible, since one never has complete control of a shooting situation. You can ask characters to reenact certain scenes, but you should be aware of any changes that may occur in the visual space. In this scene, did you notice a problem with matching shots? Let's look at it again. Jesus is holding 2 large boxes full of ice cream. But here, he's holding a large box and a small one. Is this acceptable in documentary? For you to judge. Let's look once again at how the cameraman shoots the action with the editing process in mind. He begins with a medium shot of Jesus filling up his wagon. Then he moves into a close-up of his face. As soon as he's established the framing, he takes a sufficiently long still shot. He does the same with the box of ice cream. He shoots the close-up from a slightly different angle than the medium shot to avoid a jump in the image when the scene is edited. The camera person has to be imaginative. In this situation, the truck behind Jesus gives Francisco an idea. This is known as a high-angle shot. Here's another high-angle shot of Jesus selling ice cream in a shanty town. And here is its corresponding low-angle shot. We've already spoken about the axis. Now we'll combine this idea with that of the direction of movement. There's clearly something wrong with this sequence. Let's look at it once more. Here, Jesus leaves the screen to the right. But here, the opposite occurs. He enters screen right and moves towards the left. Now he once again changes direction, moving towards the right. No wonder the spectator feels disoriented. This is another way of shooting the same scene. The direction of movement is respected and seems quite natural. You've probably noticed that the camera person often lets a character enter and leave the frame. Let's look at the difficulties we might encounter in editing if characters remain in the frame when we want to move from one situation to another. If we let Jesus enter and leave the frame, this simplifies the editing. Here's another example. Jesus is now in the picture, but we cut to another shot in which he has not yet appeared. With this technique, we don't follow Jesus each step of the way. Shortening the action like this is known as an ellipsis. Here's an even more striking example. In a single cut, Jesus is already set up in front of the church and is beginning to sell. In editing, you generally avoid cutting on camera movement. If you wait for the image to become still, the cut is often better. But this is a matter of style, and in certain situations, cutting on movement may be entirely justified. For example, in the traveling sequences we saw earlier, the camera shows different perspectives of a continuous action. Earlier we spoke about direction of movement. Generally, the subject should always move in the same direction within the frame, so the viewer won't be confused. On the other hand, letting the subject leave the frame allows you to make an ellipsis and avoid the problem of screen direction. Having a variety of shots taken from different angles gives you a much wider range of choices in editing. In this scene, for example, a shot from Francisco's point of view allows you to cross the axis without any difficulty. The rule of the axis, like many of the filmmaking practices covered in this guide, should be treated creatively. The most innovative solutions are often the best. In this case, the sound of the car horn helped justify the sudden jump in the image. Certain scenes are particularly difficult to shoot. One should therefore be even more sensitive to the editor's needs. You should stay near the action, concentrate on your most important characters, and select significant objects. Let's see how the team goes about shooting the marimba orchestra. When the camera person frames a musician or an instrument, the sound person follows with her microphone so that the recorded sound will correspond with the image. The team should work out a means of communicating that will allow the sound person to follow the movement and framing of the camera. One way to film a sequence like this is to use several cameras. But you can get the same effect by asking the band to replay the song. This allows you to film a variety of shots with just one camera. Here, the take is good enough that you can keep the entire sequence without cuts. But as the music is repetitive, you can also edit the material into one shorter sequence. Here's the result. Natural light is not always available on a shoot. Lighting this scene required 4 sources. First, the key light, then the fill, the backlight, and the background light. We turn out the background light, the backlight, the fill, and finally the key light. Let's take these lights one by one and look closely at the characteristics of each. First, the key light. The fill, the backlight, and the background light. Once the shoot is over, the team establishes an editing plan. They write out the main sequences on cards, which they can then assemble into a rough structure. A few weeks later, the new documentary is finished and ready for viewing.
Today is a feast day in Santa Lucia, a village near Tegucigalpa, the capital of Honduras. Jesus Ponce Cáceres has traveled 2 hours with his cart in order to come here and sell his ice cream.
No sé otras profesiones, por ejemplo la carpintería, la albañilería, yo no, todo eso no lo sé.
I don't know anything about carpenter plumbing. The only trade I know is selling ice cream. It's what allows me to support my family.
Jesus left the countryside in order to escape misery and came to Tegucigalpa in search of a better life. Along with many other uprooted peasants, he quickly understood that life in the capital could provide him neither with a house nor with work. He lives in a shanty town. He works 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. His average income is 10 lempiras a day, the equivalent of $4 US.
Aquí en Honduras hay mucha pobreza.
Here in Honduras, there is a lot of poverty. Politicians don't care about the condition of people living in shanty towns. Businessmen export their wealth from the country, while the poor remain stuck in the slums. You often see sick children begging in the streets to be able to buy something to eat.
Vamos a ver ahí niños pobrecitos, hasta enfermos y todo, pidiendo tal vez un 10, un 5 al adulto para comerse un confite, para comprar tal vez algo. Vaya, tenga la paleta. Váyase pues. Vaya mamá, venga. Vaya, tenga la paleta, ¿eh?
Jesus' wife, Ana, also works to contribute to the family income.
Porque como ellos van a la escuela, va, y todo está caro, los libros han subido.
School supplies for the children, like books and pencils, are becoming more and more expensive. I have to work to help my husband.
Los frijoles están a 5 lempiras la medida.
Beans are expensive, sugar has become rare, so has rice. So we eat what is most common, frijoles.
Se come lo normal, frijoles.
In Tegucigalpa, there are hundreds of ice cream vendors known as paleteros. They make a living by selling products from 5 different companies. The largest of these is Oso Polar, polar bear. The paleteros are not employees of the company. Middlemen rent them carts at 4 times the company rate and sell them merchandise at the highest possible price.
Siempre le suben cada año les van subiendo.
We protest, but every year the prices go up. It's difficult because the companies are powerful. They can buy up the politicians. No one listens to us, the poor, the workers. So in the end, we keep quiet. We keep working, and God help us. The company does absolutely nothing for us. It doesn't do us any favors.
We should go on a strike. Let's join the others and go on a strike.
I know there are problems, but if you go on a strike, things will get worse. You lose everything.
Lo que he pensado es esto de comprar pues la carretilla propia, porque la carretilla pues sí está bonita y todo, pues esta carretilla me daría para pasar.
I like to buy my own cart. That way, I could go directly to the factory to buy merchandise. I wouldn't need the middleman who buys the ice cream and rents the car. I would be better off.
Porque ya el pago de alquiler, el aumento del producto, eso ya iría a favor mío. No, ¿verdad? Vaya, espere el vuelto, Bajar el vuelto. Vaya, si hay paletas, si hay paletas, si hay paletas, si hay paletas, si hay paletas. Vaya, si hay paletas, si hay paletas. Perfecto, gracias, mamá.
Jesus has no job security, no social security. His main concern is his children's future.
Pero eso lo tenemos pensado con mi doña, con su trabajo, con mi trabajo, para que nos...
My wife and I hope that our work will give our children a better life than other children here in Honduras. We hope that they will not suffer, that they will learn a trade and be happy.
O algo, un oficio o algo que les dé para pasar.
A los carritos.
No los llevo, entonces no me hacen caso, no me quieren hacer caso nada. Bueno, si no me quieren hacer caso nada, o sea, no los llevo a los huevos. No, usted se va a ir al avioncito, ¿verdad? Ahorita.
Y no se portan bien, que no los lleve, papi. No se portan bien.
¿Ah? Sí, le voy a dar pisto. Usted después llegó a terminar de comer para darle el pisto. Oye, el refrito no lo va a tomar. Tómale pues el refrito.
Tito, ellos.
Échale a él pues un poquito. A él se le puede, se le montó un poquito, lo que le puede echar ahí, échale, que beba él, que usted no quiere, ¿ya? Deje un poquito para usted.